Okay, thank you very much to the panel. We've got a new panel now, which I am going to be moderating, and if you guys can just take the stage. I think you have to swipe the mics off the guys who've been on before. So we've heard so much today about sort of standards and governance and protocols and so on. And I think we're now ready to sort of start talking a bit more about the user experience. So in the next panel, I'm going to be joined by Fraser King, who is the Head of Business Development and Commercial Strategy at Vodafone, by Michael Power, who's the founder of Ablar, the Mobile Future of Messaging Advisor, and by our sponsor, who is David Vigar, VP and GM of TruSense. So, thank you. Great. Okay. It's going to be good to be moving the conversation on a little bit towards the user interface. I think in the last session we heard how little attention has been paid to that with big projects like the IDaaS project. Obviously, as I said earlier on, a lot of the strength of the MEF comes from the business messaging community. They're very strong in that area. And I believe about 40% of all business messaging now is one-time passwords, which has been a great breakthrough for the industry and obviously been extremely useful for enterprises and also for consumers. But it is a flawed process in the sense that there are security gaps there. And also, it's not always that friendly. Sometimes you receive a message, you have to go into an app to put the code in and so on. And so this leads us to the idea of mobile intelligence and a slightly more seamless way of doing it, which we hope doesn't weaken the security in any way. So I'm going to come to you first, David. So you helped to set up this division within Root Mobile, which is looking at this new way of doing things. So maybe you can explain to us, first of all, what mobile intelligence is, and also why your particular division was created.
Sure. So we see an opportunity that, as you said, some of the traditional methods of verifying phone numbers or other verification processes, they have some holes, both in the security and in the user experience, and SMS OTP is a good example. I've noticed recently with my own American Express app, I now have to request an SMS, which I never used to have to do. So that's an extra couple of clicks, it's mildly annoying. There are technologies that I know Fraser will certainly talk about that provide a much more seamless experience and actually enhance the security of that process. We set up the division within Root Mobile because we see our customers asking for help with how can we do the same thing in a better way, both making sure that security isn't reduced, but reducing the friction so they can bring more customers on board. That manifests in a number of ways, and there's lots of directions that this can go in. For us, it's initially helping customers just understand if someone's signing up to my service and using a phone number as a unique identifier, can I trust that phone number? Is this a real person? Is this a bot? Is this person still in control of that phone number? And we use lots of data points to help brands understand that picture.
Can you tell us a bit more about what those data points are and how you access them?
Sure, there's a variety. So at the very basic level, we look at very basic numbering information, and there's a number of people in the room that provide that service. Is it a mobile number? Actually, brands don't necessarily know that, particularly if they operate on a global scale. Within mobile number ranges, there are legitimate mobile numbers which are owned or used by genuine users. There are mobile numbers that are used by businesses. We heard earlier about the use cases of Uber and Airbnb that use mobile phone numbers to create those interactions between things like drivers and passengers. There are a number of services online you can find that offer throwaway phone number services where you don't even rent a number, you just borrow a number for a few minutes to sign up to a service. And that's bypassing the legitimate entry requirements of whatever app or service that is. So there's an example of number resources that we use. It can then go into more advanced insights, typically that we get from mobile operators, such as from Vodafone. Has there been a change in the pairing between the phone number and the SIM card in the last 12, 24 hours? That could indicate that there's been a SIM swap fraud that's taken place. What's the tenure of the account? If this phone number has had an account for 2-3 years, that maybe gives the business a little bit more confidence than a phone number that was created in the last week. So those are the types of data points that we bring together.
Right, okay. So, Fraser, this is something, an area you're focusing on within Vodafone. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the work that you do and the kind of real-life applications of this idea that you might have seen in the business sector.
Yeah. So the role of the team that I work in, we build the services inside of the mobile network that we expose to partners a bit like David's organisation as well as others. And really the focus has always been around how do we enable brands to establish a higher level of trust in the mobile number, the mobile identity, and more recently, being able to tie the mobile number into the session. So actually enabling the application on the device to request a verifiable token from the mobile network that only that service provider can map back to the mobile number. The program has always been, it's always been driven very heavily by the needs and the demands primarily of financial services institutions. So fraud happens mostly where there's money. Money is in people's banks and now moving into other payment and commerce areas. But at the very, very beginning of the program, the inception, it was actually here in the UK where it started, and it was the UK banks, the UK mobile operators all getting in a room together and saying, how do we start to open up access to some of this data, some of the signals that can be then fed into the onboarding decision engines, the fraud and life engines that the banks are using to verify customers' identities and these things. The very first thing we worked on, and David mentioned it, was effectively SIM swap. So SIM swap fraud has always been a massive challenge for mobile operators around the world. SIM swapping has humans involved in the process. Humans are always fallible for many different ways. So when we first started, that's effectively what the banks were doing. They were trying to remove the risk of SIM swap attacks on their customers, because once the SIM swap attack happens, the fraudster is now in control of the number. Any SMS, any inbound, outbound calling, accounts can be reset. So once the fraudster has control of your mobile number, they can take control of any account that uses either SMS as the primary or the secondary factor, right? Knowledge is typically compromised long before that happens. So that piece of work, which was all of the mobile operators in one country working together, agreeing a standard, has effectively eliminated SIM swap fraud as a problem in this country. You are almost unlikely, in the very, very smallest percentage, to be a victim of SIM swap fraud. But what we've actually found out now is the banks will actually do a SIM swap check amongst many of their journeys. And what they actually find is 99.3% of the time, the SIM has not swapped in the last 6 months. So what the bank can actually see is for 99.3% of those customer events, SIM swap fraud is absolutely not a risk. In the small percentage where it could be a risk, the bank may then choose to step that customer up to additional layers, but you're only creating an inconvenience for a very, very tiny percentage of your customers who may or may not be at risk.
Okay, so in that case, a fraudster's ringing up, having stolen someone's number, phone or whatever, and they want to replace the SIM so that they can get access to banking apps or whatever it is by getting a new one-time passcode. So the bank obviously then checks the network to see if the SIM swap has occurred. But what else? I mean, this is quite a familiar example. I'm sure many people in this room will be aware of this. What other use cases do you see coming down the pipe for this beyond checking whether someone has recently swapped their phone over? Fraser.
I mean, Ed, so what happened then is once you like anything, you close down one problem, the fraudsters just move on to the next problem. So once it becomes impossible to compromise an account with a SIM swap attack, the fraudsters changed their methods. And even if you think about things like PSD2 forces brands to do multi-factor authentication. So what the fraudsters have now done, and in fact probably half of the fraud happening in this country at the moment, is a social engineering method. So you will, the fraudster will phone the victim and say, hi, it's PayPal here, or it's your bank, or whoever. I'm going to send you a one-time code. Can you read that code out so I know who you are? So any authorization code, whether it's sent over SMS, WhatsApp, email, because those codes are in the clear, they can be socially engineered, be it middleware, be it social engineering attack, whatever it may be. So recently we have created a kind of an evolution, if you like, of that method. Whereas I mentioned at the beginning, we now enable brands to do a request a verifiable token using the SIM card in the device. So the application now, rather than requesting a one-time password, what the application will do when it's being installed, it'll kick off a process, it'll be given a token, the service provider, be it the bank, the coffee shop, the payment provider, can then effectively map that token back to the mobile number. So it's only what they know is they know that the mobile number on the SIM card in the device is the genuine customer. It can't be socially engineered, it can't be attacked by a man-in-the-middle attack. So we're constantly building services that try and remove friction from the journey, right? Because what consumers want, consumers don't want to have to be, taking 3D selfies and, high friction processes all the time. There are certain points in the journey where that's absolutely a requirement and a need. But what consumers are looking for is they just want to go about their life in the easiest way possible. What brands are looking for is ways of creating a more secure experience. And if you're in financial services, you'll know there is always a conflict between the team that's trying to reduce fraud and the team that's trying to build the best customer experience. And many times, the customer experience will actually win over the fraud attack. Okay. So if you can provide any service that says I'm removing friction, but I'm improving the security posture, that is an incredibly relevant message to almost every brand, be they financial services or other areas as well.
Okay, I will come to you, Michael, but I just want to come back to David quickly. So beyond fintech, financial services, what applications are you seeing for mobile intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, so financial services, fintech has really been where the business has been to date. Colombia is our primary market. We have a significant portion of the banking community using those services. And actually, before we talk about other sectors, what's interesting that we're seeing is, as Fraser said, traditionally there's been kind of the tension between the fraud and security and the consumer experience focus. We're starting to see a number of those in a couple of our customers. Those teams are working together. So with one Colombian bank, we're working with the product ops team who are responsible for delivering that customer experience. But in the same conversation are the fraud and risk team. They're working together to find the optimal outcome for both teams. And that's something we've now started to see in another Colombian bank that we're working with, where they started using the service purely for fraud purposes, just as Fraser described earlier. They're now looking to roll those same data points out to improve the user sign-in experience. So as a user signs into their bank account on their mobile device, they're using those same signals to allow those lower risk users to come in a more seamless way, but then keep the barriers that they currently have in place for those higher risk users. So in my American Express case, it's removing that need for an SMS OTP and just helping people get through the door in a more seamless way. So we are starting to see that now. That's then, because there's this, because the services are not just being used to reduce fraud, they're also being used at the consumer journey, particularly at the sign-up and the sign-in process. We're starting to see an uptake from e-commerce firms. So two major pan-Latin American e-commerce firms are currently testing the service. That's something we're very excited about because, partly because that is, it's a regional customer rather than a single country, which is great for the ecosystem to expand beyond the small number of countries that have these services today. But it opens up any consumer brand, any application that has a sign-in process that's using an identifier such as a phone number. And that's really exciting for the ecosystem, that it's not just limited to banks.
So Michael, you've got long experience of mobile messaging space and so on. I know that from previous conversations we've had, you think there are some limitations, I'm teeing you up now, to what can be understood from merely a mobile number. So maybe you could articulate some of those.
Yeah, well, I'll certainly try my best. My background is very much in messaging and the new wave of CPaaS platforms that are coming out and being able to offer messaging experiences aside from an app. We've worked over my career, worked with a number of organizations where their preference, even the mobile number is not good enough to prove that you're talking to the person you think you're talking to. And I think the example I would give on that is a lot of us will probably know people that their kids will know their PIN codes, or maybe friends or family, or the example earlier where multiple family members are using the same phone. So in that scenario, it's not good enough to just say this phone number guarantees that this person is who they say they are. And so what we did in that scenario was we built in a number of additional factors. So in the beginning of the message stream, there's certain information you could pass out, that's fine. But if you wanted to get into perhaps, in this scenario, it was managing loans. So quite a sensitive use case. People can be quite embarrassed about it, or there's lots of social aspects to it. And so we had to make sure that we asked a number of questions to ensure that that person was who they said they were. Date of birth, maybe certain PIN codes. All of these things add even more friction into what is otherwise a fantastic experience using WhatsApp, RCS, SMS, all of these great channels we're talking about. And I think that's really where I think, it's really interesting for me today, hearing a lot of what the industry is working on. Because my life, I have an Apple phone, I've got family members with Google phones. We're already brought up to the T's and C's of that, so I'm quite happy using the wallet there, and my biometrics are in that device. My biometrics, as far as I'm concerned, pretty much prove who I am. I'm certainly happy that they're who I say I am. And I think for us to really reduce friction on this, we need to be able to bring that biometrics from the operating system into the messaging stream. So if we could send a message that says, prove this person is who they say they are, and the phone can, or the channel can translate that into a biometric check, which then passes the confirmation back, that to me is the holy grail of proving that I'm actually talking to an individual who I think I'm talking to, not just a phone number.
And Fraser, is that something that you? No. I mean, so yes, you've proved that your service is good at identifying a number, but is it good at identifying a person? And if not, how can you integrate some kind of on-device biometric into what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the majority of cases, the person who's in possession of the phone is the genuine person. You're absolutely right. If you live in a family, there are these other areas, and there will always be a need to introduce additional, checks into the process. And you can actually even us as Vodafone for years, if you have a Vodafone, My Vodafone app, so if you want to log in and check your account balance, what have you, we actually authenticate the login experience against the SIM as the first step. But you can only see a certain level of information. If you wanted to change your address or something, you would be asked for additional information and checks, right, to make sure that it actually is the genuine person. So for us, it's very much about trying to remove friction for as much of the journey as possible. There will always be parts of the journey where you are going, and if it's a regulated world, so forth. But what you're seeing today, and you can look at Airbnb, you can look at Facebook, you can look at most of the kind of the platform services. They're using username and password as the login. Some of them are using a second factor. They're not doing any real kind of validation that it's a real person, it's not a bot, some of these things. So for us, it's about providing additional signals that enriches that information. I'll give you another good example outside of finance. One of the partners that we're working with is just deployed with an international coffee brand. The UK was the first place where it's been deployed. The problem that brand was trying to solve is these coffee companies provide you a subscription service. So you can pay £20 a month and you can have unlimited coffee. Well, username and password or SMS as a verification mechanism. Those credentials are shared amongst multiple people. So what that brand found is they had those coffee subscriptions being shared between 4 or 5 different people. So by enabling that brand to do the part of the authentication is against the SIM card of the device, that coffee subscription is linked to that SIM card and that device. Yes, of course, I can give my device to my friend, and my friend can go to the coffee shop and buy coffee. But what you're actually eliminating probably 90% of the genuine attack surface. Yeah. There is very few things that will solve 100% of any problem. If you're solving 100% of any problem, you're probably going to create a user experience that's far worse than your competitor who's comfortable solving 90% of the problems and accepting that the 10% problem may be the cost of doing business, right? So I think it's about, as always, it's about a combination of these pieces. Seldom is the data that we provide the only signal, but it is a signal that links back to the mobile number, to the SIM card, and that information is coming out of the mobile network, which is a fairly trusted source. It would be almost impossible for someone to break into the kind of the depths of the mobile network where this information lives and be able to compromise it. Security is very much in the kind of the DNA, if you like, of our industry.
David, is that a question that you've wrestled with, of how to ensure that the person is the same as the number?
Not in
No.
depth at this stage. No, not in depth at this stage. I mean, we believe that what we're providing is an evolution on top of what brands are able to do today. I'm certain it's not perfect, and as Fraser said, I don't think our customers are aiming for 100% in terms of fraud reduction. Certainly, when I've worked at a brand, there was never an intention to hit 100%, and as Fraser said, that's just a cost of doing business. One of the things that right now that is encouraging is, compared to some of the challenges in the SMS market, and particularly around a very good example is SMS pumping or toll fraud, which is costing hundreds of millions of dollars to various people in the industry. Things like Number Verify, which is the method of silently verifying a phone number directly between the app and the mobile operator, makes it much harder to do that. It's not going to be perfect, and as Fraser said earlier, the fraudsters will find ways around things. Fraud is very much a cat and mouse game. So, no, I don't think what we're providing is necessarily going to be perfect forever. We will have to continue evolving, and as new challenges come up for our customers, we'll have to continue to figure out how do we solve those for them.
I think it's key is the use case, and I think when we're talking about apps and phones, being able to validate that the number, absolutely, there's so many other layers within that we can do within an app, and I think it's when you're looking at the use case and choosing whether it's an app, whether it's a messaging channel, whether it's a browser or a third-party wallet, all of these different use cases have different levels, and it's having the toolbox to be able to pick, well, do I need to use a SIM swap check? Do I need to be able to check that this is an individual on a phone number? Or do I need to add in those extra layers for this specific feature to then expose that out to a customer? And I think we're moving into a very exciting time where we're starting to get these tools to be able to apply them to the different use cases.
Yeah, we have great tools available. The APIs that Vodafone and a number of other mobile operators, both in the UK and across many countries now, have released, are giving us a great toolkit to help start to chip into some of these challenges like SIM swap fraud. I think one of the big challenges we have as an ecosystem is awareness. Lots of people in the room, people like Fraser and myself and Michael are very well aware of some of the benefits that these services have brought to the coffee chain, to most of the UK banks, and to myself. I don't have to use that silly card reader when I log into my bank account anymore because of the services that they're providing. But that awareness hasn't necessarily traveled overseas. If you compare things to the business messaging ecosystem that went global very quickly because a lot of global brands were using those services, our experience so far has been that the brands using these identity services are somewhat local. For us, it's local banks in Colombia, Peru. It's not global brands at this stage. And because of that, the awareness of these hasn't traveled to other markets. And that's both from the brand perspective. The brands aren't aware that this could exist, that this could solve their problem. But also the mobile operators that provide these services aren't aware that there is a business opportunity. Vodafone make money from these services, as do the other mobile operators that offer these. Mobile operators, as we all know, are always looking for new revenue streams as ARPUs decline, as WhatsApp has killed off messaging revenues, things like that. And this is a very good example of where they can find that. So we need to build awareness of the success stories like the coffee chain, so that we can show everyone in the ecosystem across the globe that this is a real opportunity for us, for everybody, for mobile operators, for brands, and for service providers.
So Fraser, how do you make money? What's the business model?
We do it for love. There has to be a commercial return on any capability that you're developing, particularly in this climate, right? So there is a revenue model there, but there's also, the net outtake is the services we're building. It makes it easier for consumers to interact online. It protects consumer customers from fraud and financial crime. It protects our enterprise customers as well. If you look at certainly the noise coming out of government economic crime plan, you look at what's going on. 41% now of all crime in the UK is financially oriented. There are a number of motivators that organisations like us have to find ways of opening up access to information, sharing data in a privacy compliant, secure way that protects people's rights. But there's also, and what I find interesting about this event, there's two lessons here, and we've learned this. Whatever you're building, it can't make the consumer experience worse. It has to make the consumer experience better. And I hear a lot of, ideas discussed and thoughts. And the last panel we'll think about the consumer experience after we've thought about the technology. I think that you are heading for a complete failure there, would be my kind of personal feeling. The other bit is building anything inside of a mobile network is actually really, really hard. So it's wonderful to get up and say there's this theoretical way of inserting tokens and credentials, but the reality is you've got to think about the way in which these services are developed. Europe is very different to the United States. It's not 3 carriers with 500 million people. It's several hundred carriers with 1 million people across multiple geographies. It's far, far harder. We sometimes jokingly say we are the Wombles in Vodafone, and if you're not British or lived in a British media environment, you won't know who the Wombles are. But for those of you who don't know, the Wombles were a television show from the 1970s, and these little people lived in Wimbledon Common, these little monsters, and they used to recycle everything, right? The Wombles of Wimbledon, they make use of the things everyone else leaves behind. So a big sort of component of what we have to look at when we're developing services, what is the stuff that's lying around that we can use and kind of reutilize? Having to re-engineer the entire network for these purposes, it just does not fly. It doesn't fly commercially. You can't get the resource and the technology to do it. So you've got to try and do things in a simple way, and you've got to make sure that you continue to focus on making sure the consumer is getting a better experience with a greater security posture. That's very much the focus of our business.
Well, you're entirely the wrong age and the wrong nationality to know anything about the Wombles, so I'm very impressed.
I grew up in New Zealand. It was on television.
It was on TV, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe time for one quick question before we run to the break, if there is one. Maybe not. Maybe you prefer to go and have some coffee. So, all right. Listen, thank you very much to Fraser, to David and Michael, and thanks for listening, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.